Welcome to TRINKtalks. My name is Valerie Cathawala.
And I'm Paularita Sidor. We are the founders and editors of Trink Magazine, a digital publication exploring how wine intersects with and impacts the narrative, culture, history, and geography of the European spaces where German is common cultural currency.
Please join us as we deepen the understanding of what we like to call German-speaking wines and wine cultures of Austria, Germany, Alto Adige, Südtirol, and Switzerland, in lively conversations with some of the most interesting voices from these regions.
Let's get started. Welcome to TRINKtalks, the show that brings you the inspiring individuals behind the best bottles of German-speaking wine. This monthly series of conversations with winemakers from Austria, Germany, Alto Adige, and Switzerland is an extension of Trink Magazine and offers an unusual opportunity to get personal with the people, cultures, languages, and landscapes shaping your favorite bottles of wine. In today's episode, we shine a spotlight on the alpine winemaking wonder known as Switzerland and are thrilled to welcome Aargau winemaker Hauksson as our guest. In our conversation, Haus will illuminate his approaches in the vineyard and cellar, delve into evolving agroforestry practices, and explain why Switzerland is an exciting proving ground for these experiments.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for these kind introductory words. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yes. What drew you away from Iceland to Switzerland and away from finance to wine? It's certainly an unusual beginning, I think, for many of us to hear about.
In terms of Iceland, that was quite simple. My wife is Swiss, so people, they choose their place depending on where they follow their heart. In terms of wine, it's been an interest of mine all the time since I was studying at the university in Iceland. I then later studied at UCSB in California, Santa Barbara. It's always been sort of a hobby for me. And then, one day the hobby just became my profession.
And what was that beginning like? How did you switch over?
I started by renting a parcel down in the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, in Ticino, and I was doing that on looking after that on weekends and still keeping my job in finance. And then making wine in the laundry room at home, much to my wife's delight. I did that for 2 years, and then there was a change in my job, and I just didn't feel like looking for another job in finance, so I just went for it.
Oh, we're awfully glad that you did.
It was quite tough initially. It's a physical job. I'd always been doing a lot of sports and a lot of like long distance running and stuff like that. But this is it's a different kettle of fish. It's actually quite strenuous. So it took my body a couple of years to sort of adapt.
I can only imagine. Yeah. I always think about that when I start to volunteer to do a harvest for a short amount of time. It's, exhausted after just a couple of days. And to think about doing that for the entire year is a hats off to you. In Liliana's profile, she points to how far beyond the basics of organic and biodynamic viticulture that you go. Can you talk about some of the more distinctive features of your approach?
I've read the agricultural course that Rudolf Steiner gave, which is 8 lectures, which was sort of the foundation on which biodynamics was built. The first 6 lectures are focused on sort of remedies for a land that needs help. And then the last 2 lectures are actually focusing on what the land actually should look like when it's healthy, or that's how I'm interpreting these lectures. So for me, the lecture number 7 is actually the one that's most interesting, and it focuses on how things fit together in terms of trees, bushes, grasses, grapevines on one side, and then on the other side, all the microorganisms on the soils, to the flying insects, to the birds, and then how you need to sort of structure it together so that you build sort of a harmonious landscape. None of that actually makes it into the minimal standards for biodynamics. The minimal standard for biodynamics is, broadly speaking, it's basically organic plus the 2 horn preparations, so the horn silicate and the horn manure that you need to spray. I mean, that's roughly what sort of the minimum is. But the inspiration that these 8 lectures give to, to go further are great. And it's very much encouraged that people, read them and sort of experiment on their own and develop their own individuality. So where this has taken me is to start to integrate actually trees and bushes into the vines, not just at the end of the row, but also into the rows. Also, sort of the intuition that the grapevine comes originally from the forest edge. It evolved over many, many thousands of years at the forest edge. So the natural microbiome, if you will, for the root system of the grapevine is that of a forest, which is fungal dominated. Whereas a prairie landscape, which is sort of the typical landscape of organic vineyards today, is 50-50 fungal bacteria in terms of biomass, roughly. And then if you go to plots that are plowed regularly, you get a bacteria-dominated soils. So you're very, very far away from the natural microbiome of the vine. And intuitively, I feel that or I find it plausible that the microbiome around the roots of the vine, they are just as important for the vine as our microbiome is for our health. And just to sort of shed a little bit of light on that, so the economy in the soil works in a way that the vine does photosynthesis and produces sugars. And then it exudes a significant portion of that sugars through the roots to feed microorganisms in the soil. And the vines, actually, they're quite smart. They can actually sort of control a little bit what kind of microorganisms are feeding off it. And then the microorganisms in return use their enzymes to dissolve minerals from the rock, put them into organic compounds, and then feed them to the vine in return. So it's not that the root of the vine is sort of digging into the rock. It's always going via this mediator, the microorganisms. So to me, it's very important I'm trying to build, I can't really say it's an agroforestry system, but it's sort of, I'm trying to get as close to the soil of a forest, but without having the full canopy of a forest above, if you see what I mean. So if you take a walk through a forest, first thing you'll notice that there's no ray of sunlight hitting the forest soil, right? So everywhere there's a little, bit of leaf that's catching every ray of light that's shining through. So we try to develop our canopy and other plants so that we protect the soil so that it stays a little moist and a little cooler. And also there's plenty of wood debris lying around. So if I can organize my vineyards in a way where I don't have to drive the vineyards, then I can leave lots of wood debris around that then decays over longer time. And this sort of longer time decay allows other types of fungi or mycorrhiza to come in and to establish there. So that's sort of one of the things that I do, which is then I could also say this is also inspired by lecture 7 out of the agricultural course. And of course, I mean, as you can imagine, I mean, these are minerals that are being fed to the vine. The composition of those depends on the composition of the microbiome naturally, and these are, of course, they are helpful for the health of the wine, but they're also precursors for the flavor components in that wine that we then drink. So you can imagine that this is going to have an impact on how the wine tastes in the end.
Absolutely. It takes the holistic approach to almost an entirely different level. Beyond Steiner and his lecture series, do you have other inspirations that you're drawing from people that have really sort of changed or shaped the way that you're thinking and the way that you bring that thinking into the vineyard?
Yeah, I read Masanobu Fukuoka's book, The One Straw Revolution, The One Straw Revolution, with great interest. I found that very interesting. I love to follow whatever Mimi Castile puts out or what Nate Reddy is doing from the US or Hans-Jörg Schmidt here in Switzerland, things of that nature. But also, sort of thinking about, biodynamics. If you really look at it sort of, just take a step back and look at it sort of a bit from afar, there's an echo of shamanism in biodynamics. So I've also been sort of, looking into other things where, for example, Amazonian shamanism and things like that, to sort of see, are there things there that I can find to inspire me.
Maybe that's the perfect launching point to go jump around a little bit on our script, but to talk about the dieta that you've just done. Maybe if you could explain to everyone what that is and how you are beginning to integrate some of those concepts into your work.
Yeah. So the way that Amazonian shaman learned his craft is that he, according to them, he actually learns it from the spirit of the plant. And he does that by doing what's called a diet or a dieta, where he or she restricts their intake of food and sort of limits it to very bland food items, restricts a number of things in their life, isolates ideally, and then consumes something from this plant on a daily basis. And typically is working with a shaman teacher who will sort of guide the process. In some cases, the person will also be drinking what's called ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a highly psychedelic brew that is frequently used in Amazonian shamanism. Or it can be accompanied with drinking tobacco. So you take a tea from tobacco and drink that. Now, the tobacco that the shamans in both North and South America use is typically from a plant called Nicotiana rustica, whereas the smoking tobacco that is the basis of the cigarette industry today is Nicotiana tabacum. And the Nicotiana rustica, the jungle tobacco, has anywhere between 10 to 20 times the amount of nicotine that the other one does. But it also doesn't contain all the added chemicals that the cigarette industry actually adds to it. And that tobacco is actually the primary medicinal plant of the Amazonian shamans. And for example, there is no, they would never conduct an ayahuasca ceremony without tobacco being involved, whereas the other way would actually work. So I did sort of a small introduction to this studying process, into this dieta, where I did a 1 week silent retreat with true Amazonian shamans, or two shamans that have studied in the Amazons. And I was working with tobacco and with a plant called hawthorn. Hawthorn is a bush that grows here as well here in Europe. And for me, the primary motivation was really to sort of learn this technology, like how does this really work? And how do you actually sort of open up sort of communication? And the way that this works within the Amazonian shamanism, that's that most of the communication comes through during your dreams, in your dream space, when you're working with these, plants that are sort of not psychedelic, or whereas with ayahuasca, the communication is quite obvious in your waking days. So yeah, that was quite an interesting experience. And I guess the way I'm trying to approach this is that I don't have sort of a belief or a faith in the way that it has to be like this or like that, but rather I try to sort of approach it from a point of curiosity, exploration, and I prefer to try to experience things and sort of validate them through that for me, sort of as in, what is alive for me, what is true for me, rather than reading something and just sort of having to believe in it. And this was sort of an attempt to try to do that. And I think, so what I come away with from that is that there's definitely something there, as in terms of communication with plant. There is something there is alive for me today. I think I can definitely say that. Whereas, for example, some of the things within the agricultural course of Rudolf Steiner, where he starts to talk about the astral energy or astralicity or something, that is something I don't feel, at least at this stage. Maybe I can develop it at some later stage, but it's something that is sort of, very much in the hypothesis bucket, whereas as the plant communication is something that's a bit more live. I realize this is, for most of us, this is something that's sort of hard to believe, and it's easy to sort of dismiss. Maybe to sort of couch it a little bit, I'd like to mention that there is actually absolutely fascinating research going on currently in terms of intelligence of plants. Things have been coming out in the last 10 or 20 years. Humanity, we've always been sort of obsessed with our sort of special status and how we are sort of the special creatures of the earth and everybody else is below us. And then we started to discover that, well, actually, there are other animals that know how to build tools. Okay, so we make ourselves special because of language, and then we figured out, well, actually, dolphins can communicate. So little by little, the sciences are starting to chip away at the special status of the human being, but plants were always very firmly much lower down than we were. And if anybody's curious to look into this, a good starting point would be, for example, to look into the research of there's a lady called Gagliano, an Italian lady who's working in Australia. She has, for example, been able to replicate the experiment that Pavlov did with the dogs. So Pavlov did this experiment with the dogs where he rang a bell and then gave the dogs some food. And he conditioned the dogs to the bell that they got the food. And then he rang the bell and was able to verify that they were starting to salivate in anticipation of the food. So that's sort of a clear thing that something like this would never have happened in nature, right? No dog would have been bred in nature to automatically start to salivate at the ring of bell. Well, Monica Gagliano was able to show that the same holds for plants. So she would keep the plants in a darkness, and then she would have a certain sound coming from a specific direction at the plant. And then a little bit later, a light would be starting to shine at the plant from the same direction. And light is the food of the plant. And then she'd do this from different directions. And what the plants learned to do was to position their leaves to optimally capture the light at the sound, right? This is actually quite interesting. And she has done other experiments to show that plants can learn. She had a plant called mimosa, which tends to sort of shrink together when it feels threatened. And she let the plant sort of drop from a small height, and then it shrunk together. But the shrinking together is energetically very expensive for the plant. And then she did this just enough time until the plant learned, this drop is actually not dangerous to me. I can just still leave my leaves out. And then 2 weeks later, the plant still remembered this. Right? These are things that they're just coming out now.
Trink is the only English-language digital publication dedicated to the German-speaking wines of Austria, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland. On-the-ground reporting from world-class authors and journalists, narrative essays, interviews, bottle picks, and food pairings help connect the dots and get to the heart of these wines. Our team of journalists, essayists, experts, artists, and editors translates it all for you.
Regular rolling content keeps you tapped into the now of these regions and cultures. Whether you're a curious reader or industry professional, you'll find all the essential and behind-the-scenes intel you need. Please visit trinkmag.com/subscribe and choose the subscription plan that's right for you.
So yeah, does that mean plants have consciousness? Not of course, right? But they're definitely much more intelligent than we thought they were. I guess my approach is just to suspend my disbelief and just sort of try and just look what happens. And I did, and yeah, I felt there was something there. And then when I came back, I actually discovered that I actually do have a very strong relationship with the grapevine. And the quality of that relationship also changed a little bit during this of going through this process. There was something in me that learned something. So in terms of what changed, what happened, one thing that has been happening for me now over the past half a year or so is that I've started to change my relationship with wine as a consumer. And this dieta sort of confirmed that change, or sort of firmed it up and explained it to me in a certain way, in the sense that the psychedelic plants, they have a very obvious influence on us. But other plants, they also influence us, but in a much more subtle way. And you need to sort of tune yourself to feel into what is their message, or how do they influence us. And what I feel now is that the wine is it can be very heart opening. But if you consume, say, 2 glasses of wine every day or 3 glasses of wine every day, it sort of dulls the effect. So I guess my relationship with wine has changed from wine as a food item to maybe more of a sacrament, where I sort of choose very consciously when I do enjoy wine, and then it's to get sort of the full-on experience, enjoying the company of the people I'm with. So yeah, I guess that's a long answer, but yeah, that's what a dieta is, and that's what it has done to me so far. And definitely it was very interesting to sort of learn this technology. And I mean, this technology also exists in other cultures. It's not just from the Amazonian shamans. I mean, it's known within, say, European herbalism that, you know, people like to sit with a plant and meditate with it. But the Amazonian shamans have taken it to a completely different level, in the sense that you're in a silent retreat, you restrict your diet, you consume the plant, you're doing this for a whole week or up to a month or even longer. And then it's accompanied by tobacco. And tobacco tends to be sort of like a megaphone for the message of the plant so that you can hear it more easily. Yeah, so that has been a very interesting learning experience to sort of learn this technology a bit, and I will definitely be applying that more in my work. And I think the winter months are sort of ideal for further exploration into this, where I can do dietas with grapevine or other plants that I grow.
So much to think about there. That goes very, very deep. I'm wondering, did you go into wine growing and making with your first vintage being in 2017 with an idea that you'd be exploring in these directions, or did this all evolve as you were doing it?
This has all evolved after the fact. There has been sort of another change that has been happening in me. I studied maths and physics, and then I was in finance for 20 years. So I was completely struck in my rational brain, to the point now where this pendulum has swung almost completely to the other side, where it drives the woman that works with me, it drives her absolutely nuts how I just decide things sort of intuitively. And then she wants to have a rational conversation. And I'm like, I don't know why, we're just doing it because it has to be this way. And so, I have wondered if my choosing wine as sort of going into that was also at some level an intuitive decision at the time. It's possible, but it was not a conscious decision, and by no stretch of the imagination. And all of this that I'm describing now, sort of percolating up to my conscious awareness, is something that's been happening after my change.
None of this sounds particularly Swiss in mentality. I'm wondering what kind of relationship you have with your neighboring wine growers. Is there an exchange? Are they interested in what you're doing?
I have a very good relationship with them, and in fact, I've built a new trellis system so that I can keep my sheep in the vineyards all year round, and I'm planting lots of herbs and trees and bushes in the vines, and at first they were sort of scratching their head and sort of, what the hell is this guy doing? But now, tomorrow night, this time, I will be giving a presentation to the wine growing association of my local wine growing association. There's at least 35 people that have signed up. So to sort of, show them the things that I'll be doing. But I think I will leave the topic of dieta for a smaller circle.
Actually, I have a selfish question. Could you talk a bit more about your vermouths? Vermouth has been something that I've been interested in for a long time, and it supports everything that you're talking about with this very holistic approach, this incorporating what grows there, a very complete way of thinking. And so I'd love to hear more about them if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about it. Sort of how you came to the idea and where you think it's going.
Yeah, no, of course. So basically, aromatized wines have been with humanity at least for 4,000 years. And of course, archaeological evidence is very scant here, but the oldest evidence we have, if I understand correctly, is from around 8,000 years from Georgia, which is just wine, just grapes. And then from Egypt, they found a vinotheque, or containing, I think it was 50 different jars, and many of them were actually aromatized, some even with psychedelic substances. But they were aromatized with different things. And then from the Romans, we have the first sort of official recipe for vermouth, and it is just wine, herbs, and spices. And then it was in the 1700s that a gentleman in Turin, I forgot his name, made a modification where he started adding a lot of sugar and lots of spirits to the vermouth. And this was a huge hit. And this is actually what we know as a vermouth today. So lots of sugar, lots of spirits. The wine has been sort of, de-emphasized. Typically, you'd be taking a fairly neutral wine. Many times it is oxidated as well, so that, when you open the bottle and you put it in a cupboard, and then 4 months later you take it out again, you don't notice any change, right? So it's been already oxidated. My idea was to go sort of back to the original. So we basically just have fresh herbs from the vineyard and just clean, good wine that has not been oxidated. Initially, I made 2 still vermouths, white and red. And then with the white one, I noticed that I was always making simple cocktail with sparkling wine and vermouth. But hey, this is stupid. I can, why do I need to open 2 bottles? I can just make it in 1 bottle. So the first instance we did was a pet nut, where we co-fermented the herbs and the wine. The next instance, which we'll be launching fairly soon, we made a base wine in 1 year. And then over the following summer, we harvested the flowers and the herbs whenever they were, flowering or optimal, and then infused them in the base wine. And then in the fall, we had a new juice that we used for the secondary fermentation in the bottle. And yeah, that's the process we're following today. And then I've been showing it around in a couple of international wine fairs, and it's been getting very good reception. So I really much enjoy that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Simon Wolf is a big fan, so that says a lot.
Good. Glad he likes it.
I guess we have maybe time for just one more question before we go to our audience questions. I'm really curious about the Pinots. I have to admit that because the wines haven't arrived in New York and I haven't made my way to the Aargau yet. I've not tasted them, but reading Juliana's article and hearing from others, I'm really intrigued. Can you give us a sense of the style that is emerging from your vineyards, from your farming, and from your cellar?
Yep. So my style has been changing a little bit over time. So my first vintage was macerated for 6 weeks with some punch down, so quite heavy-handed, to the point where now I'm making almost all of my wines sort of infusion style. So we pick the grapes into small, plastic picking bins. We bring them like that into the cellar, and then we just drop that into the tank, and I trample on the grapes a little bit, just to get the air pockets out of it, and then it undergoes a sort of semi-carbonic maceration with 100% of the stems. This is a process that we do for practically all whites and all reds, and then the maceration times are sort of 1 to 2 weeks for whites and maybe 10 days to 3 weeks for the reds. We tend to press before the fermentation is finished, just that we're not extracting a lot of harsh stuff. We're really looking for sort of elegance. But the wines then have this sort of a herbal undertone because they really have 100% of the stems. I like to harvest early to get clean grapes. I don't like too high alcohol. So the alcohol level on our 22 vintage is between 11 and maybe 13. So quite low alcohol level, zero residual sugar. And then the stems are green. And my mates will sort of tear their hair out. It's going to be crazy. And if you take the wines that are 6 months, when they're 6 months young, still in the barrel, they're very, very green. And they tend to have sort of an earthy flavor, but also this sort of a, nice brightness in the fruit that you get from the semi-carbonic maceration. And we also don't do any, or I try to really avoid any punch downs or pump overs now. So we just keep the cap a little bit moist with a bucket. Pretty much everything is aged in oak. For most of it is for 1 year in oak, but typically used oak. So yeah, a mixture of earthiness and bright fruit. If the wine tolerates it, I try to do without added sulfites. But if it needs sulfites, I will add sulfites. If it needs filtration, I will filter. But we tend to be fairly minimal, and we declare on the back label what we do. So yeah, I hope that gives you an idea of the style.
Perfect.
So as I said, in terms of the soil, initially, right, it's sort of a similar soil to Burgundy, similar climate to Burgundy, a couple of decades ago, but Swiss genetic material. So it's there are some differences in the flavor profile.
I have to admit, you're making me incredibly thirsty. Very much wishing I had a nice bottle of Pinot around. So Eric Wood asked, I'm intrigued that you are bringing some of the diversity of your land into the wines and fermented products themselves by introducing herbs, botanicals, etc. Could you share a bit more about this exploration?
Yeah, so this exploration actually takes quite a lot of time because we just planted apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, service trees, and then blackthorn, hawthorn, sea buckthorn, elder. And now I need to sit here and wait for a couple of years until we can finally harvest something in a quantity that we can start to explore. The way I chose what goes into what parcel is sort of I sort of go into the parcel and just sort of try to feel into what wants to be here, or I tend to sort of get an inspiration from the parcel, what wants to be grown here, and then we go ahead and plant the plants. And I must admit, I'm not fail-proof. Some of them actually just die and disappear, and then others thrive. So we sort of see as well, what thrives, and then that tends to guide or sort of be sort of the first guess at what fits together. So, for example, with the hawthorn, we planted that in a parcel which has Kerner, which is a German variety, very aromatic variety. And this is actually the tree that I was dieting in my dieta. So initially I was thinking, so hawthorn is very good for your heart health. It's a very strong medicinal plant. And what the parts of the plant you use are both the flowers, the leaves, and the berries. And initially I was thinking I was going to use all three of them, infuse them into the kernel. But the message I got through the dieta was, no, that's wrong. I should just focus on the berries. So I should kind of see that sort of it's a dialogue. The process is a dialogue between me and whatever is there, whatever that is. People may say it's just my fantasy. Okay, that's okay. Or maybe there is something there, and I certainly feel that like there is something there. And yeah, so sort of ongoing dialogue, and then we'll learn this learning by doing. Then once I get the first hawthorn berry harvest, we'll definitely add that to the kernel, and we'll see where we go from there.
Beautiful way to think about it. The idea of communication, of plant communication extending into a dialogue is I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. Thank you.
We also have a question from Liliana Schoenberger, who is joining us today, the author of the article that we published in Trink. So that's a great honor for us. And she has a question or two. She says she's thinking quite often about your vineyards and plant composition from a balanced equilibrium perspective. You just mentioned the herbs. I can assume finding equilibrium, as in type of plants that grow in your vineyards, that you wish to be there, is sometimes a challenge. How do you understand lack of the balance? I remember you mentioned once that clover was taking over some parts of the vineyard. Does it mean to you that, for example, the soil is not ready, or is it just nature with its blessings and curses? Which is such a great question. I feel like a lot of biodynamic growers look for these clues. If you have dandelions growing in your soil, that it needs aeration, for example. So I'd be fascinated to hear what you say about that.
I guess I used to think of myself sort of as the doer who was deciding where we want to go, and then looking for clues as to if I'm going in the right way and what I need to actually do. But lately, I've started to sort of accept that I'm really just in a service role, if you will, and it's in a way sort of the land that decide what grows and what kind of equilibrium they want to achieve. So, like I was saying earlier, in terms of deciding, what plants come in, and then seeing that, some succeed, some don't, and then just sort of accepting it, and then sort of nurturing whatever the land wants to bring. And I guess also in terms of flavor profile of the wine, you can apply the same thing there, rather than sort of initially when I was starting this business, I had very clear ideas of exactly what kind of wine I wanted to make, and now it's sort of like, well, it's not really up to me. I mean, it's sort of like I just do whatever needs to be done so that the land or whatever there is there can sort of express whatever they want to express. And so the equilibrium it's not really mine to decide what the equilibrium is or when it is in equilibrium, but it's more sort of I don't know, just sort of following the clues, following the process, making sure that the vines are at least healthy and producing healthy grapes. That's of course paramount. But other than that, sort of creating an ecosystem that integrates plants and animals and plants of different sizes, and and then just let it develop its own character. I don't have to decide everything. That's the beauty thing. That's the rational mind. That's the rational mind trying to decide everything. And the intuition is like, the Protestant knows much better than I do what he wants to do. So why not just let it do it?
I think our last question is just a follow-up from Liliana, who is an ornithologist, as I know you know. And she, in her article, referenced I think it was at that point, your objective of setting up 300 birdhouses in your vineyards. And she's asking how that project is going.
Well, I did tell her she would be roped in to help me with that. So we still haven't done it, but I would definitely want to do that. One of the things that Steiner talks about, and I mentioned earlier about the astral energy that he talks about. So his view is that trees are sort of accumulating all this astral energy, and then the birds are responsible for distributing it. Okay, like I said, I mean, this is not for me a lived reality. I can't sense this. What I have noticed in the last couple of years, or primarily in the last year, is that my personal relationship with the birds has changed, in the sense that my consciousness comes with this monkey suit that you see on the screen, and this monkey suit has this monkey brain attached to it that keeps yapping on about all kinds of stupid stuff that very repetitive, very useless. And then sometimes I can find respite when I'm doing some manual labor in the vineyards, where I don't have any machine, and I can just sort of listen to the birds. And you can just sort of lose yourself in that concert and the time, and you can get sort of a brief periods of time when the monkey brain goes tilt, and it's bliss.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come in and talk with us. I'm going to be thinking for quite a while about a lot of the stuff that you've been talking about today. It makes me want to pack up my bag and hop on a train to Switzerland.
You're welcome anytime.
Thank you. To everybody who came out to listen, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. If you have suggestions or themes for guests that you'd like to see in upcoming episodes, please do send us an email. We love hearing from you. Thank you.
Before we let everybody go, Hauksson, can we just ask you, where can people find you, find your wines, and follow you and find out more about what you're up to?
So I have a website, Hauksson Wine. I'm on Instagram, Hauksson Wine as well. Weine, written in German, W-E-I-N-E. That's probably the best way to sort of see what's going on. On my website, people can sign up for the newsletter. I do actively post something in either Icelandic or German. I'm a bit lazier with English, but I'll try to make those more frequent as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, enjoy. Wishing you a beautiful season.
Thanks so much. And thank you for the conversation and the beautiful questions and the opportunity to talk to you. It's been very pleasant.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
You can always find us on Instagram at trink_magazine and at trinkmag.com, or sign up for our free newsletter, where you'll find regular updates on our upcoming news, articles, and podcasts. Until next time, keep trinking.